Welcome back to another video. I am planning on doing a revised version of the Disturbing Reddit Post Iceberg soon, with new information that has come out on some of the topics on said iceberg. While doing the research for this, I came across some disturbing comments on a few posts. So sit back and strap in. This is gonna get wild. The 24 hours before my dad passed away, stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital COVID rules. My mother, sister, and myself had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of the ICU nurses, who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed very quickly at 3:30 a.m. the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then he was no longer conscious, so we said our goodbyes and he was gone. Later that morning, while my mom slept, I was calling cremation services to schedule his body for pickup at the hospital, and going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us. His phone was in there, and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words of him. I opened his phone and all our texts has not been read, not mine or my mom and sisters. I thought this was so odd, but figured he must have been suffering so much he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and realized my dad has been chatting with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her, and she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on. Why was he in the ER, etc. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having, at the very least, an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her via DMs and found out she was 19 years old. She was 17 when they met. He was a high school bus driver, and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he passed away, and dating someone younger than his grandchildren. Someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a crappy secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad, with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never find out. She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had tried out, so we said screw it, let's go back. She is basically family. We were all so happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner. We all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then slowly, she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us. That if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, She started talking about her infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a sperm donor. This all happened at around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his sperm and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, banging on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I had never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now, by the way. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, one of the maid's daughters, who was probably 13 or 14 at the time, had a pretty weird relationship with me. We both mutually liked each other, but the relationship just couldn't happen because my mother strictly forbade me to associate myself with any of the attendants or their family. We did some mild petting, I guess. She touched me and I touched her. I don't recall any sort of intercourse. Don't even think I was even old enough for that. We had a bunch of dogs in the back area, mainly German Shepherd mutts. I personally love dogs and all sorts of animals, so I frequently spend my time in the back lot with the dogs. I watched the dogs mount each other and was interested in what they were doing. I even once saw one of the dogs lick its own private parts and it would grow, and I guess the dog finished itself after a certain amount of licking. Yeah, it was kind of gross, but I was interested. I went over to feed the dog and she was in the back lot with her mom hanging up some clothes. I told her about my pretty screwed up idea. I wanted her to get mounted by one of the bigger dogs and she agreed to it. We waited a couple of days when absolutely no one was home except for maybe a couple of other of the attendants' kids for her to do it. She stripped down and walked over to one of the bigger dogs and kneeled down on all fours in front of the dog. The dog started sniffing her backside for a few seconds and she got up and ran. The dog then chased after her and jumped on her back. She didn't fully fall face first as she went down on all fours again, hands and knees. The dog then went on to do the deed with her. A few weeks later, she ended her own life. I don't know if it was because of my idea or if there were any other causes leading to her ending her life. To this day, I still think that my juvenile mind could have caused the passing of another person. When I was 15, my parents were going through a divorce. My mom worked night shifts and my dad was living with a friend of his. One night my sister, who was 19 at the time, came home pretty drunk from a party. She was acting goofy and fell on the couch next to me. She started grabbing my leg and laughing and we started fondling. We ended up doing the deed right there. When we woke up the next day, she had no recollection of the night before, so I just kept my mouth shut. Fast forward to when I'm 18. Sister is home from college and dad is over for a visit. They get into an argument and in a fit of rage, my dad announces how he has never forgiven her for the abortion she got when she was 19 and subsequently ending the life of his grandchild. He is very religious. I then realized the baby she aborted was in fact mine. And as far as I know, I am the only one who knows since she has never mentioned that night. Bushwalking in New South Wales, Australia. Me and my friend came across this weird platform looking thing made out of rocks. Later that year, the cops arrested some bloke on suspicion of the murders of a series of backpackers who had gone missing over the course of a few years. And at the site of several of the murders, slightly off in the bush were these altars. A current affairs show runs footage of one. The trial and run up to it were all over the news. And yeah, it's that thing we found. The altars were typically no more than 300 yards from the victim's shallow graves. The guy who was arrested and subsequently convicted for the murders is Ivan MacLeod, Australia's worst serial killer. The cops are pretty sure that at least one other person was involved in the murders than the one now in jail for the crime. They just couldn't prove it. I once helped out a female friend's family by taking care of their cat for a week. Every day for a week, I would go over there and snoop around their house. I found my friend's diary and proceeded to read the entire thing. I used this information to get her to like me, and she is currently my wife. I once took a poop in the bathtub and then realized what a horrible mistake I'd made. I flung poo into a hole in the wall. My parents renovated and patched up the hole, so now there is a 15-year-old turd in between the bathroom and kitchen wall of my childhood home. Not even using a throwaway because I have no shame. First time telling anyone this. This thread is so deep that probably no one will see, but if one person does see it, I'll feel better. I'm basically living a lie. I told my entire family how I was able to transfer out of community college and into a university, but I never finished up the requirements. So since I live at home, every day instead of going to school, I go to the local library. My lies are so extensive. I even go to the campus and meet my girlfriend for lunch sometimes. I've made fake transcripts to show my family and to make it look like I'm actually studying. I go to MIT OpenCourseWare to look up facts that I learned in class that day. I have become a remarkable liar. I hope to be transferring in the fall, and then I look forward to living a normal life. Coming clean is not an option at this point. Buried comment, but here goes. Not life ruining, but makes me feel like crap every time I think about it. As I've told Reddit before, I have a blind brother. When we were young, I used to get so frustrated at all the extra attention he received and how I had to be more responsible with my sibling than my peers. So when my brother and I would go play, go to the store, or just generally go anywhere without adults, I would abandon him somewhere unfamiliar to him. Then I would stand off quietly and watch the anxiety set in as he tried to figure out where he was and what was going on. Also, I was really intelligent as a child and knew that was my ticket to attention. When I would help my brother with his homework, I would teach him all the wrong answers so that I could continue being the smartest sibling. Today, my brother is my best friend. He goes to college and lives by himself. He's become one of the most intelligent men I've ever met. I'm trying to make it up to him now by being the best big sister ever, but I still feel so guilty at how I found him to be a burden when I was a kid. Update: I immediately called my brother after posting this and caught him while he was walking to a study group. I told him about my guilt and he laughed. He understands how frustrating it must have been. He told me that all of the good things I have done as a sister completely overshadow anything bad I did, and that he loves me more than anything. I'm glad I spoke to him, and I encourage others on here to talk to someone if they can. I lit the tree on fire for kicks and ended up burning half a forest down, and several homes went up in flames in the process. I wanted to say I did that when I saw it on the news. When I was 17, I had an argument with my father and I told him to bugger off. Later that evening, he hung himself. Our argument was the last time he spoke to anyone in our family, and for that I feel a terrible amount of guilt. Instead of him saying goodbye and I love you to my mom and brothers, he got told to bugger off. before he went and ended his own life. My punishment is to live the rest of my days in shame and guilt. He never left a note either. So my girlfriend has a younger sister who has cerebral palsy and autism, and although she's very smart, she can't really support herself fully and will probably need help and guidance for the rest of her life, which is perfectly okay. She's basically our adopted daughter. My girlfriend taught her sister how to walk and talk and basically everything she knows. One day though, my girlfriend told me how there were 3 instances in her life where her sister basically broke character and told her how she was stuck and couldn't get out and that she was trapped and needed help desperately. The sister talks in a very specific, kiddish and cutesy way. She is very innocent and to this day, at 19 years old, talks to her stuffed animals like as if they are real. During the 3 times where she broke character, my girlfriend told me her sister spoke in a certain desperate and adult tone and made a face like she was scared for her life, and literally the next second her face would change and she would go back to the way she was before. And my girlfriend told me it would be like her sister didn't remember what just happened moments before. To this day, it scares her and makes her wonder what if her sister is trapped in a childlike state and sometimes has moments of clarity. I'm not sure, but when she told me, I could tell it was serious. She has never brought it up ever since because of how much it creeps her out. I want to be really vague about this, so I'll explain it this way. A very mild-mannered, friendly older man told me about how he was working abroad in an area that had just gone through an ethnicity-based civil war. The place was still very chaotic and lawless. He and his colleagues found out there was a group of local men from one ethnic group who would abduct and assault primary school-aged girls from the other ethnic group. There was really no good legal mechanism through which to address this. My friend and his colleagues decided the best way to deal with it was to find out where the men lived and shoot them in the head. They went out over the course of one night and took the lives of several men and left their bodies in the road. The assaults in the area stopped because most of the perpetrators were dead and the ones that were left didn't dare do anything about it. My friend wasn't upset that he ended their lives, but seemed haunted by what the men were doing to the girls. He said of the men, "They had no business being alive." My cousin was a nanny for a wealthy family in the Upper West Side for 3 years. They had one daughter who had dairy allergies. My cousin thought she could ease dairy into her diet and make her allergy disappear. So she did that, slowly adding dairy into her diet. The poor little girl had allergic reactions and the parents could not figure it out. Of course, my cousin didn't fess up, and of course, the allergy never disappeared. That poor girl having such bad reactions and all because of my cousin's psycho way of thinking. This isn't mine, it's my grandpa's. This was in the late 1940s. One of his buddies calls him up saying he needs someone to talk to, so they meet at a local bar. They had both finished serving in World War II, my gramps in the South Pacific and the other guy in Europe. They meet at a bar and the guy is visibly upset and says he has to get something off his chest. It's been bothering him since he came home. He proceeds to tell him this story, which I will try my best to remember correctly. Gramps passed away 11 years ago, so I can't confirm details anymore. He was stationed either in eastern France or southwest Belgium, I think near the border with Germany. The Allies had been winning and the war was only technically still on. This guy was stationed at a POW camp where they had some German soldiers. He was ordered to escort 6 to 10 of them to another location just a few miles away. It was winter and very cold that night. He had to drive them through woods on dirt roads, and the truck breaks down en route with engine issues. He orders them to get out of the back so he can keep an eye on them while he deals with the engine. So the Germans are just standing there in the middle of the woods, and apparently their movements and talking to each other, he couldn't speak German, are making him paranoid. He starts yelling comments at them like, "Stop talking, move closer together, stay where I can see you." None of the Germans speaks English, so there is more talking amongst themselves and confused movements, which only increases the guy's already heightened state of fear and paranoia. One of the German soldiers makes too sudden of a movement or comes towards him and he shoots. The other soldiers start freaking out, so he starts shooting them. He ended up ending the lives of everyone and running back to his base. He tells his commanding officer what happened, that he panicked and thought they were devising a plan to end his life and escape, so he shot them all. The officer basically tells him not to tell anyone about it and arranges to get him discharged as soon as possible and to not think or speak of it again. They sweep the whole thing under the rug and send the guy home. They didn't have trauma counseling back in those days, especially for something that they wanted to keep quiet, which is why my grandpa came to hear the story. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side. The real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyways, I had been driving for about 45 minutes and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass behind some bushes to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22 and then I fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rear view mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate. Screw that, I thought to myself, so I got the heck out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, Hey you, get out of your car, now!" I knocked the heck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't sleep on the side of a deserted road. One night as a kid, I heard my parents having an explosive argument in their bedroom, which suddenly went quiet. The door was closed and locked. I found out during a drunk phone call from my mother it was because she attempted to shoot my father in the face with a .303, but it didn't go off when she pulled the trigger as there were no bullets. They were both horrified and just stared at each other apparently. They're still together. My former wife, now ex, and I were having problems. I was certain she was cheating on me. I found her notes where she was figuring out and had added up how much I was worth dead. My brother was stealing money from my father who had dementia. This went on for a year, and then I found out about it because the bank who had my father's mortgage called me wondering why it hasn't been paid in 6 months. My father's bank account went into the negative around this time too, and when I confronted my brother about it, he said, "Well, I gotta pay my bills." I was about to take control of all of the accounts and make sure things got back on track, but my father ended up in the hospital and passed shortly after that. My brother also stole some of my inheritance too. In the end, he stole over $5,000 from his dying father. This isn't really something that would ruin my life, but it is something I've held on to for some time. In 2013, it was my first semester of college. I had this anthropology class, tribal and ethnic religions, at 3:30 in the morning. I'm not exactly a morning person, and this girl I sat next to wasn't either. It was one of those things where we just saw each other and knew we were both absolute zombies still. We had this unspoken bond of, no one else will understand how much we want sleep, so let's just stay with each other for the rest of the semester. And we stayed pretty true to that, even got pretty close. I mean, we'd spend 3 hours with each other in class every day, 3 days a week. It would often be 4 if we got food afterwards, so it's understandable that we got close. But we were both super religious and thought every form of attraction was some kind of sin. So as close as we got, we were always super awkward with each other. When we got an assignment to go do interviews and all, it felt natural to go with each other and just help out. So we got mine done pretty early in the semester, relatively speaking, but hers took a bit more planning. We had to drive about 2 hours out to this mountain city where her grandpa lived to talk to him. I didn't drive at the time, so we took her car. There was about 3 months worth of sexual tension built up between us, so the drive was kind of uncomfortable, but we kind of skirted around our feelings towards each other for the first time. Once the interview was completed, we had dinner in a small pub and started heading back. It was about dusk, and both of us said that we wanted to wander into the forest for a bit. Just take in the atmosphere for a while, you know? So we parked off the side of the road and went down into the trees. It was beautiful. We lived in the desert, where most of the vegetation we were used to was scraggly bush at most, a few palm trees here and there. But this was amazing. No sound from the city, no smoke from cars, no people, just trees and silence. She ended up brushing up against me to get past some roots, but in a way that felt almost deliberate. So I tested it back, brushing up against her at times where I didn't necessarily need to. We finally decided to say screw it to all our fears of damnation and just decided to have fun. I wasn't a virgin at that point, but I made a lot of really dumb decisions up to that moment, which was why I was as religious as I was. She was a virgin, despite being a few years older than me. So at the time, it was a very deep emotional bond we made. I don't really care for the idea of virginity anymore. It just isn't important to me. But there was that feeling that it would last forever, that we would always be each other's and whatnot. When we were finished, we had our collective walk of shame to her car, and obviously it was awkward. Just driving back home was awkward for pretty much the opposite reason. as when we were headed up in the first place. But the silence gave me a lot of time to think. I decided that I was going to tell her exactly how I felt. I know in hindsight, I don't know why I didn't to begin with, but I was fresh 18 and always kinda bad with people, but I didn't have the nerves to do it then. It was Friday, I'd see her again on Monday, and that would be my moment. Monday came and I was super excited, dressed better than I normally do, all of it. But she didn't show up. We usually didn't question when the other person didn't show, so I didn't think much of it. She missed a whole week and I started getting concerned. Tried texting and calling her, but no replies. She missed a second week, and that Friday I asked the teacher. Turns out he just got the news himself and was going to tell the class before he began the lecture anyway. The Sunday after our forest escapade, she passed away. A car accident. For a while I didn't react. I didn't believe it. I didn't know anything about her family outside of her grandpa, so I used what I could to find her family. I met her brother kind of sporadically as I showed up at his work. He could see that I was pretty shaken up as I spoke, and I could see that he was getting kind of agitated, so we decided to wait until his shift was over and we'd talk. He told me about how happy she was the days before, how she'd been super depressed, but for just a little while she was getting out of her room more, getting along with her parents, and just felt more fun to be around. Then he told me about how someone was driving drunk, going 60 in a business area, hit her from behind and wrapped her car around a tree. That was what did it. That was the moment that I really felt the impact. For days I couldn't do anything. I didn't want to do anything. I failed all but one class that semester. My entire life was basically falling apart. Through all of it, I never really told my parents, friends, or anyone. They just knew I was in a pretty bad place, but not why. I've had a few attempts at relationships since, but it was hard for me to not feel guilty whenever I got close to someone, because part of me was still in love with her. I got rid of my belief in God and His plan, because how could I justify her senseless death at the hands of some other a-hole in a cosmic plan? She died teaching that guy importance of responsibility? No, screw that. Since then, I've met someone else who's helped me get past my attachment to Marissa. I've been pretty open about what baggage I've brought, as she was about hers. Now that I think about it, I met her right around the time all of this was happening. I've gotten a lot more comfortable with my existential awareness too, I guess. So I'm in a much healthier place overall. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like this type of content, tap the like button and let me know down below in the comments if you want to see more of these types of videos, and subscribe to soothe that fascination.